In the last hour, India's Air Accident Investigation Bureau has released its preliminary report into last month's Air India plane crash, which killed more than 270 people. The report has found no significant faults with the plane. It says both fuel control switches, which are used to turn engines on or off when on the ground, were moved shortly after takeoff, causing both engines to lose thrust. While the investigation is continuing, it is clear that attention is now focused on the actions of the pilots. In the cockpit voice recording, the report says one of the pilots is heard asking the other why he did the cut-off. Air India Flight 171 came down less than a minute after takeoff from Ahmedabad, bound for London Gatwick. In a moment, we'll speak to our business correspondent, Theo Leggett, who's been looking through these findings. First, let's go to Samira Hussain, who's in Mumbai for us tonight. And Samira, this is very much details still coming through, really. Just tell us some of the key findings and what we're learning here.
What we've understood from what was happening on the plane was that it was the co-pilot that was in charge of the takeoff, and the pilot was actually monitoring. Then there was a question from inside the cockpit: why did you switch the fuel engines from the cutoff to the cutoff position from the on position? Well, one pilot said to the other, I did not do that. So then they switched it back. Now, the way that the plane works is if this happens mid-flight, that there's some cutoff from the fuel to the engines, well, it does restart once you put it back into that go mode, that flight mode. But for some reason, one of the engines didn't exactly thrust at the right time. You know, it's still a preliminary report. It's still very much the initial findings. More details will come out within the next several months to year even. But this preliminary report is pretty, it shows that perhaps there wasn't something wrong with the plane.
And it's impossible, really, Samira, to overstate just how devastating this was.
It is a devastating loss to the airline industry and, of course, to anyone who suffered, who lost a loved one in that plane crash. You know, in anticipation of this report, I spoke with one family member whose husband had died on the plane crash, and she has an 11-year-old son and is bereft at the idea of having to take care of her son on her own, that her son continues to lament, why is my daddy dead? And in terms of this report, this woman said to me, you know, yes, that's great that they can find all of this information about what happened on the plane, you know, what may have gone wrong, but ultimately it's never going to bring her husband back. And so many family members, although are waiting for this report, ultimately, this will not bring any of their family members back.
Samira, for now, thank you very much. Well, let's just recap some of the key findings that are, as we say, still emerging. The report finding no significant fault with the plane or its engines. Rather, the focus is here in the cockpit, in particular on the pilots and what happened to those fuel control switches. The report says flight record data shows both switches, normally used to turn the engines on or off when on the ground, were moved, as we heard, from the run to the cut-off position shortly after takeoff, that causing both engines to lose thrust. It says, as we've heard, one of the pilots is heard asking the other why he did the cut-off. The other pilot, says the report, responded that he hadn't. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Theo Leggett. You've been looking through these details as they emerged. Explain more then about the role of these fuel switches.
Well, these are two switches which are on the central console of the cockpit, and their job, as we've already heard, is to turn the engines on when the aircraft is on the ground and turn them off again once it's landed. Now, they would not normally be used when the aircraft's in the air. There are some exceptions to that. For example, if there's been an engine failure or an engine fire, you want to cut off the fuel supply to that engine and make sure that it's not going to cause any further problems, but that is rare. Now, what we have here is information from the flight data recorder, which shows quite conclusively that those switches, both of them, were in the cutoff position, and that one of the pilots We don't know which one, noticed this was the case and asked the other pilot why they had turned those switches into the opposite position, into the cut-off position. That's what we know at the moment. We don't know what the intentions were of whichever pilot pushed those switches into the cut-off position. All we know is that this happened. Now, the focus of the investigation going forward will be on why. Was the confusion in the cockpit at the time? It's a very harsh environment when something is going wrong shortly after takeoff. It may be that one of the pilots made a mistake, or there may be some other motive. All we have now is those bald facts that these switches, which are incidentally designed not to be used accidentally, it's a two-step process to turn them from the run to the cut-off position, why those switches were moved. Because we know now that in all likelihood, this is what brought the plane down. Once the engines had been switched off, they started reducing thrust, bringing thrust back, which the pilot, at least one of the pilots, was trying to do, takes time, and they simply didn't have enough time.